Thank y'all for joining us this evening. You are on Container Chat with Mojo and Jessica. We in here like swimwear, where every Monday and Thursday at 9:30 p.m. we educate you guys about different topics related to building with shipping containers. And so our last topic was pretty cool. So we talked about land, right? We need to understand, like, if you're going to start doing development using shipping containers, how you should go about doing that. And honestly, the very first step is using land. And so I'm very excited to be able to share some insight tonight. Tonight, we actually are going to talk about the pros and cons of doing container construction. And the reason why is because, in some people's opinions, this may not be the best thing. This container life is not for everybody. But what I will say is that if we take the time out to kind of weigh the options with pros and cons, I think you may get a different perspective, especially if you may have a certain kind of thought process in regards to your thoughts behind this or stuff that you kind of heard about on the internet. So please, by all means, if you're joining in, definitely ask your questions. We're going live on Facebook and YouTube right now, and we're in Clubhouse. And so let's get it started. You ready, Mojo?
Yep, yep.
All
You
right.
know I'll be muting when you be talking. On Clubhouse, I'll be trying to mute myself so we don't get the double echo. But yes, I'm ready.
So the first pro, or I would say this is more like a need to know type thing. A lot of people want to understand from a container perspective, how long do they last? And so I want to talk a little bit about that and then go into the pros and cons of that for a person who, again, if they've never been in construction before, you may not even know how long they last, but more importantly, you may not know if that's something you even want to partake in. So typically, a container home lasts about 25 years. And the reason why I say approximately that time is because what people don't realize is when you leave the container exposed, quite naturally with the heat and the weather, as far as like water and other types of extreme weather conditions, that can really affect how that particular home is going to withstand its maintenance process. So one thing I can say when we're doing our build outs is we constantly have certain materials that we use on the container itself to allow for it to be able to stay protected. And so we have people who ask us about, well, Jessica, what if I live in a warm climate? Or what if we live in a climate where it's really cold? And what if we live in a location where it's raining all the time or we're near water? How does that affect the durability of the container? And so I guess from that respect, we can kind of go into why the pros and cons of using a container could be beneficial. And so, for one, when we're talking about some of the pros, the pro of using a shipping container is once it's properly built out, it can be windproof, waterproof, and fireproof. So a lot of people don't realize that the container itself naturally, just based off of what it's made out of, can be very beneficial to certain climates. And so for instance, if you are in a heavy heat climate, that means that you're able to actually insulate it in a way that that property or that building keeps the cool air in. Same thing with the opposite side, where if it's a cooler climate, same thing, based on how you insulate it, and also your HVAC system's efficiencies will actually allow for that particular property to have some unique benefits as far as keeping the cool air in. Even when it's a actual high condensation, so let's say you live near water, you live on a beach, or near a place that constantly rains, for instance. The pro of the container, especially if it's built correctly, it actually would be pretty cool because it allows for you to not have to worry about, of course, flooding as well as any kind of corrosion that can come from consistent exposure to water. Mojo, how do you feel about that?
um, I think that the wind and watertight aspect of containers in itself, is a huge pro because um just like you said, if you live in a place that's near water, you wanna know that you're protected against the elements. But people fail to realize a lot of times that these containers are created to go across seas for miles and miles and miles and exposed to hurricane type weather, when going across seas and being shipped. So they are made to withstand that type of stuff. And like you said, the differences with because a lot of times people always ask me, like, people have been contacting me from Canada, like, um is it too cold up here for me to have a container? They don't realize that the insulation ratings and the different levels of insulation that we use based on climate, and they are climate specific, which makes for um a good use of the container for their area. Like, it's area specific, just like pricing is area specific, installation is area specific, because of the fact that we have to take climate into consideration. So yeah, the fact that they're wind and watertight is a huge pro for shipping containers.
How do you feel about a con? So we don't want to make it seem like everything about this is so positive, right? We're not going to be on that stuff on this show. So, what would you say is, depending on the climate, is maybe a con of having the container? And let's just say, just for I guess information's sake, let's just say that the people who will be doing container projects aren't builders like us. And so let's just say you are the one that don't have the experience. You're not a general contractor. You're not a builder developer. If you're using
Right.
a container, what are some of the cons?
Um, it's just, if you're not a regular builder in this space, then you don't necessarily understand the concepts of how the fact that it's steel, coupled with the different weather, coupled with weather conditions, water or extreme heat or extreme cold, can cause things like condensation, right? If it's not done correctly, where it's wind and water tight, and using the right materials to control condensation and rust and things of the like, then you wind up in a situation where you have problems. And getting um into a shipping container home is a compact space and is very specific. Not all of them are small, but the space where we do the installation and the plumbing and the electrical is not the same space range that it is for typical stick built houses. So um having to go in and fix because it wasn't done right the first time can be an extremely daunting task if not done correctly the first time. So that can definitely be a con, just not understanding the specifics of container building and what needs to be done with regard to climate and water control and such.
Thank you for that. And I would say, along those same lines, as a tip for understanding this container process, that if you aren't fully versed or don't really understand how to do a container build out, I personally don't suggest you do it. And I'm just telling you from honestly, an honest perspective as a builder. I'm not saying you have to use us, but you do need to understand what goes into this. And this is why we have the container chat, because we want you guys to really understand these are some of the things you have to take into consideration when you're looking to do a build out. So I've had situations where people come to us and they've asked us, "Hey, I want to build my own. I want to do a DIY." And I always ask, "Well, why'd you come to me?" you know, I'm confused. You know, I'm a builder. So if you're coming to me and you think I'm going to give you free information, I don't think that's fair. You know, you're about to build something on your own, but you're going to use our expertise for free. And that's not really how that works. And so as a builder, people do come to us for different reasons. They may come to us as a consultant and say, "Hey, I want to do this type of project. Can I pay you guys to watch over my project?" They may ask us to do a partial, which is partially done, meaning there's no finishes and then it's not even installed. So they may have us come in and just do that. Or maybe they even have us come in and do the full build out from start to finish. And so again, when we're talking about the pros and cons, to bring it back to the subject at hand, the pros and cons of that particular scenario is if you don't know, a con could be that you may make some very expensive mistakes. And I've had people call me and say, "Hey, Jessica, I never permanently affixed this container. What can I do?" And we can give them suggestions, but you have to remember now you got to lift that container back up to now lay a foundation, or you got to move it out the way to lay the foundation, let it dry, or whatever decision you're going to make with that particular type of foundation, and then you have to go and put that back. So I would suggest that you actually do your research. Figure out before you are about to do your container project, figure out what kind of foundation you want, and set your foundation first before you go and start doing your project. And not just that, what she talked about with condensation and all that stuff. Do your research. So honestly, to be frank, what we do is not significantly different from traditional construction. There are some nuances that are very different, but for the most part, you still have to understand how to build a house in order to still build. And so we don't encourage you guys to go out and just start doing DIY container houses, not really knowing whether or not you are doing it correctly. And it just honestly, it behooves you to also maybe just have a professional overseeing it and helping you with this. So please, by all means, reach out to me or Mojo. We will happily help you. So we're going to
Right. People hit me up every day like, Mojo, I want to build a house and I need your help. Whoa, wait, if you building it, then how you need my help? If you want me to be a consultant, if you want me to, like you said, oversee the situation, then that's different. But a lot of times people call themselves, they want to pick your brain. Um and get a whole bunch of, like, I give out free game. Like, I'm on live all the time, and I have a whole DIY set that I have for sale on shippingcontainermojo.com. You got the whole master class that we have available on shippingliving.com. Like, it's a bunch of information out there for DIY people. But you can't think that you're going to come to me and as a builder and say, I want to do it myself, but I need you to give me all the information I need to be able to, like, I can provide you resources. But it's not an easy thing. It's just like it's not an easy thing to build to say I'm just gonna walk out and build my own stick built house. Like, it's not something people just randomly take on these tasks, right? It's a lot of research that needs to be done. And it's the same with container builds.
I agree. Thank you for bringing that tidbit in there. Um, you know, as professionals, we don't mind helping, but we can't hold your hand if we're not in the project. The reality is that we'll be held liable. So the first thing people do, oh well, Jessica told me this or Mojo told me that, and it's just not fair. And it just, to be honest with you, if you want to work in excellence, we definitely have to just make sure that we're doing it the right way the first time. So go ahead and do your research, guys. Don't be afraid to research and ask for resources. That's what we're here for. So the next thing I wanted to talk about for a pro is the prefab side of doing containers. So you have site built container work, and then you have off site. And so one thing I would say is, for one, on site means that you're building in like a stick built home traditionally is constructed, which means you're doing it physically on site to the land wherever it is that you guys are doing that project at, right? So I mean from start to finish. Now, a pro of that is because that customer can come stop past any time and check things out and see the progress of a project. However, the con is that you're always fighting against the weather. My thing is when you're doing an on-site, and that's how we started. We did a lot of on-site stuff, and what we found was that our projects were getting delayed because of global warming. Let's be honest. Like, y'all know, this weather is weird as ever. I'm in Florida right now. The last 2 days it's been 80 degrees. Just a week ago it was 40. So it's like, come on, like what we doing? And so, with that, we got to keep that in mind that when you're choosing to do an on site project, there are those main factors that you could be going against, right? And so, the other side to it is when you're doing off site builds, which we call prefab or modular, meaning it's built in a manufacturing facility and it's fully built out, and then you bring it and you go ahead and you place it and install it on site, right? And so with that, that's kind of what I like about what we do is because we do prefabs now. So before we used to do site build, it take us probably double the time to be able to do a build out, and now it's taking half the time because we don't have to fight against the weather. Another key thing about doing offsite is you can control the environment, and so by you being able to control the environment, you're able to do what it is that you came to do, which is to build that house in a timely fashion and be able to help the customer execute their project easily. So with that, I'll let Mojo give some information about some pros and cons she feel about, doing build outs as prefabs, on site, off site. How you feel about that, Mojo?
I'm a fan of the prefab. The craziest thing is I was supposed to be in Mobile, Alabama. I told you today for because we're building the barbershop containers and we're doing it on site,
Nice.
and it rained. It poured today. And I was like, I'm not driving all the way down to Mobile to be able to do nothing because the weather stopped us today. So it's crazy because I had spoke on live the other day, like, yeah, y'all, we're gonna go live from Mobile, Alabama. I'm gonna show y'all, we're gonna do some cuts and I'm gonna show y'all what's going on, what's the update with the containers. And then it was like boom. It was like 90% chance of thunderstorms today. I was like, come on. And now I gotta go to New York tomorrow, so I can't even go like try to back it up and go to Mobile tomorrow. I'm gonna just have to go sometime in February. But it's that's definitely a con of on-site building, right? Fighting with the weather, and we're in the process of purchasing our warehouse. So I'm gonna be like, because like you said, you cut the build time in half and you don't have to fight the weather, like you can keep going and get things done. But we have somebody that wants to ask a question on
Sure.
Clubhouse.
Awesome. Hey, Bill, you had a question or a comment?
Not too much a question. I'm actually architect designer, and I have a studio, Object Design, and we focus on small build. And I was just going to add some input on shipping container homes, and for somebody that's interested in it but never been in one or been in small spaces before, and just the idea that the volume of the space, for anybody that hasn't been in one or looked into it too much, is that they're usually 8 foot wide, and then they're usually the standard is the 8 foot ceiling height, 8 foot tall, and then you can have an 8'6" or a 9'6", which is known as a high cube, and so the ideal would be like a side open high cube, because then the existing container was designed, structured for the side, at least one side to open with, usually two large doors. And because that's the thing in engineering days and designing days is if you cut too much out of them, then you're restructuring it, and then your cost starts going up. And then another thing these days is that a lot of people ask questions about used containers and new containers, and the whole idea that originally that why they were becoming popular was the idea of sustainability and adaptive reuse, and reusing shipping containers that you could buy a used shipping container for a few $1,000s, and then have somebody like Mojo and Jessica to build it out for you, and there's been some changes actually just in the past few weeks that with shipping containers always were a little bit of an odd animal because they weren't in the building code per se, which is called the IBC, International Building Code. and then there's the IRC, which is the Residential Building Code. And so they just got into the IBC,
Yep.
and so that's the good thing is that so now most building departments will recognize them a little bit easier, and then a lot of people have questions about, well, how do you finance a shipping container home? And I always tell people, well, you never say it's a shipping container home, it's a home. And the shipping container is really your means and your method of building it. It's just like as if you built a house and you put corrugated metal siding. It's just the means to build. So yeah, I just wanted to add some of that info. And with that introduction to IBC, one of the things that's changing also is that they really most municipalities want you to use what they call new containers. But new containers are really a one-trip container, because a lot of these companies that are shipping these thousands of containers full of products over to the U.S., and then it's actually more economically feasible for these companies when they ship it one trip, and then these things a commercial reseller will buy the containers to use for things like this, like shipping container homes and commercial builds. And so the reason why building departments really don't want you to use containers that have done many trips is because of these things are out on the ocean for a long time in salt water, and they're concerned about corrosion to the structure, and they're concerned about what was shipped in them. As far as the containers, a lot of times they'll have a record, a history of what they were used for, but not so much. And for me, I really liked the idea of using the much used container, and that it really is an adaptive reuse, and it really is sustainable, because you're reusing something that back in the day you would hope wouldn't go to scrap or landfill. But yeah, other than that, that's my 2 cents, and just wanted to add that for you guys.
Bill, stay up for a second. Can you give the listeners some insight on reinforcing? So you know how you spoke of the corrosion just from it being out at sea, but what type of best practices would you suggest for reinforcing the container? So you mentioned also that the best type is when they have one side already cut out, but let's just say it's a traditional container and no cutouts have occurred. What's your thought process on the reinforcement of those openings, talking about the windows and doors that our listeners should watch out for?
Yeah, and it's really not much different than any built form or architecture. There is the thing, like I mentioned, is that the ideal is because these containers, that the way they're structured, I always think of it like a roll cage, like just a frame, and the sides and the roof, they're not really that much of they're just an envelope. And similar to, which it's not that much different than a trailer home, a mobile home. We actually demoed a mobile home a few weeks ago that was on some land I owned. Somebody had abandoned it there and nobody wanted it, so we demoed it. It's the first time I had ever demoed a mobile home, and you're amazed once you pull that thing apart how little structure there actually is in the walls and in the ceiling. And the shipping containers, because of their frame, they're a hell of a lot stronger than like a trailer home, a mobile home, because of that steel frame. And they're designed in a way of how they would stack. So you can have these things multiple high stacked on a ship, and you see commercial developments using them and stacking them, because the frame, the structure itself, is very rigid. But just like anything else in architecture, when you're cutting an opening, if it's something that wasn't in the original design of the container, so it wasn't originally engineered for that opening, that the larger the opening goes, the larger your reinforcement, or your, what we would call a header, because you have your structure on the sides, your columns, and your headers above the window or door. And so that is the thing. Like if you Google a container, you just Google a high cube open side, and then you'll see pictures of them with the doors open and the frame. And then that gives you an idea that, okay, well, that's how it comes. So I could have, glass slider doors or bifold doors or something in those openings that are already existing. So then again, the side open are harder to come by because they're less common, and of course they're more sought after by the industry that's using them for adaptive reuse. Um, so that's the thing in a lot of regions that people are afraid of. How do you edit a shipping container? And so if you're going to do a shipping container project, then I would say you have a structural engineer involved on the team consulting on it, regardless of if it's needed or not, just so they can input, and any structural engineer that has experience with commercial architecture, be it small scale or large scale, they're going to understand steel and reinforcement and stuff like that. It doesn't matter that it's a shipping container or what it is.
For sure. Well, we appreciate you, Bill. Thank you for that insight. And what he mentioned was another, I guess, con of trying to do a DIY. You may not have an engineer. And so when you're doing those cuts, as he mentioned, that's really important. So structural engineers can give you the best insight on placement of doors and windows. Let's say you want to do a multi-level or a stackable design. Those things are really important. And so in order for you to kind of maintain the safety of, you doing your project, not just for you as a DIYer, but also as the inhabitant, whoever is going to be using that structure, it's really important that you understand all of what goes into that, because that can be a very terrible situation. Talking about a freak accident, you go build and then it implodes because you didn't properly, as he mentioned, use headers and reinforcements for your doors and windows, or maybe you cut a hole and you wanted a skylight. Anything could happen just from the weight of water and snow and other climate conditions. So just be careful. I appreciate, Bill giving that insight from his perspective. As you know, this show isn't about us, it's about teaching you guys what goes into this process. And then we'll always have somebody from the audience that may have a question or a comment that may spark another type of scenario where, in your head, it's something that may not be something you thought about, but it's very important to this process. So thank you, Bill. We appreciate you.
Oh, sure thing. I enjoy it. It's a passion of mine. Just anything to do with small build I'm lucky in that spot that what I want to do anyways is my day job. So I love talking about it too. But thanks for having me on.
Yes, thanks, Bill.
I love having other people speak about containers with us because it reinforces what we teach people, and like listening to him and hearing him say everything about the weather and about reinforcing any cuts that you make, and like it was like hearing ourselves again, like in prior episodes, right, about the ins and outs of shipping containers. So it's just confirmation that we ain't crazy, we've been doing this. This is what we do. And that we're hopefully impacting people, and hopefully that they're learning a lot about shipping containers. And the entrance into the IBC, I was gonna say, we was gonna talk about that because that's huge. Like that's gonna open us up to all those municipalities that was raising eyebrows, like, huh? What you talking about? We like, no, now we in here. Now you gotta listen. Now you gotta hear what's going on. So my sister Yvette is checking in on Facebook. She said, "Hey ladies, hey." Um and so I'm just like, it's just confidence and confirmation that we're making some sort of a difference, and the sharing of information. I love it.
Yes, thank you. I agree fully. I'm grateful to be able to have this platform. Shout out to Clubhouse for letting us be on here. Shout out to Facebook and also YouTube. These opportunities, being able to expose you guys to this information is absolutely what's going to allow for us to grow. And so, shout out to Ali. Au, thank you. We see you giving us a shout over here on our Facebook and YouTube. And so the next thing I wanted to talk about is something that Bill actually mentioned, which is people seeing the container itself as recyclable. And so I used air quotes because let's, just based off of what he just mentioned, some people, depending on, like he mentioned, as far as it being a one tripper or it's had multiple uses, some people prefer for the container to be a brand new one tripper. And so when you're talking about it from a recycling perspective or a reuse perspective, I'll break that down a little bit more. So one tripper means that it went from from origin to destination once, literally one time. And so sometimes people, when they think of a container and they hear the word new, they automatically think it's a brand new, just fresh off the presses container. But no, it's just been used once. Typically, that's what you call a new container. It's a one tripper. It has had literally one trip from origin to destination. Now, as far as the multiple multiple use one, so some things that we need to talk about, which is pretty important. One, when it's been used multiple times, as he mentioned, so one side of it is each container has like a serial number or some information, I would say, because remember we want to keep the kindergarten level, right? It has some information on there that actually tells you the birth date of that container. So you'll be able to know how old the container is. It has some other information on there too, that kind of breaks down more information about the container that you just may not know, right? And so the other side to it is what was once in that container. And so you have some decommissioned containers, meaning they're no longer in use because maybe it had hazardous material in it or something like that. Or if it's been used multiple times, it doesn't hurt to just ask what was in the container. And so here's a pro. The pro of using, based off of what Bill has mentioned, of using a container that's been used multiple times, is that by it being used multiple times, you're actually able to really get that green, that recycling feel, that word recycle, reuse, because
Right.
it's been used.
Used. Right.
It's been abused and used because it's been used multiple times, right? Not abused, but maybe used. And so the other side to it, a con would be of it if you aren't careful and you don't ask certain questions, and then you finally receive your delivery of that container and you never knew what was in it or the condition of it or any of that, that it could incur additional costs, associated with doing that build out. So an example of that would be a lot of, and I'm just giving y'all a heads up, a lot of these websites that sell containers are stock photos. Your container that you're going to get is not going to look like what's on these websites. So
Right.
a lot of brokerages out there that unfortunately they're selling containers. They say they sell them all over, the country and all of that. And while that may be true, unless you're able to physically see your container before you purchase it, then you don't really know what you're getting until it's delivered. And so the unfortunate or con of purchasing a used or recycled container is that you may get something that has a little bit more damage than you bargained for. And so again, we're always going to give you a tip on how to avoid that. So a tip on how to avoid that, guys, is to be honest with you, ask for pictures. And so if you're not going to be able to physically go to where the container is located, at least ask for pictures and even set a time where, don't be afraid that it's Zoom time. You may not want to catch the COVID. And
I was getting ready to say that.
do a
We could
video
do
chat.
video.
Yeah, do a
And
video chat and you tell them to slow down right where all the writing is on that door.
right. So
You make
you can
sure
confirm the
screenshot.
number
That's right.
of the container so that when you get the container, you're confirming that you're getting that container because they could take pictures and send you pictures of a nice, pristine container. And then you get the container, you done paid for shipping and all of that stuff. And then you get the container and it's a totally different container. But it because you listen to Mojo and Jess Container Life, and now you know that each container has a specific number on the side, that you make sure you get pictures and video. We live in a FaceTime type of society right now. So you get pictures and video of the whole container all the way around so you can see any corrosion, dents, things, anything like that, excessive use, and get record that number on the side of the container so that when they send you a container, you can confirm that that is the same container that they sent you the pictures and the video of. And that's definitely that can be a pro and a con, right? Because that having being able to do video and pictures is a pro nowadays because we was in a situation where it was like, yeah, this the one I'm sending you, and oh well, you're gonna get what you get because we weren't in a space where everything is we're so much in the Zoom and FaceTime society. Um, but now that we're in that space, that can be a pro, but it also can be a con because you got to know now that you know that you can do some research on containers, then you know you need to research and see. Like I had a really nice build on my Instagram page, and they said that they containers was in use for 12 years before they got them. So that's some recycling for your behind. You know what I'm saying? It been used for 12 years, but they built a huge house with out of eight containers, and it came out really nice, right? So that's and another pro of using used containers is price. You could get them for way less than the one trip containers. So that's my input on the pros and cons of used containers.
I listen. I concur with everything you're saying.
Somebody else on Clubhouse is raising their hand.
Okay.
Let me see if I could bring them up.
We're gonna bring,
David.
we're gonna bring you
Let,
right on up. Hey, David. We'll
let
see
me
you up
see.
here
Let
in
me
a
see.
second.
There we go. Hey, David.
I've worked in the container shipping industry for my whole career, so to me, coming on Clubhouse when I saw containers, I was like, oh my god, like this is my groove. So just a couple quick things you guys mentioned. You hit all the salient points, but a couple things is that one is you can also ask for the prefix of the container, and certain countries or certain shipping lines that you might be buying a container from, they treat their containers differently. So it's a known fact, for example, that the Japanese ocean shipping companies, so anything with MOL, K-Line, NYK, those are better boxes because the Japanese, they maintain their containers through the life of the container.
Yeah.
Okay.
The Korean carriers, Hanjin, Hyundai, there's another company, SM Lines, they trash their boxes. And so the experience was we were the finance company behind building the containers. So we would build them, and then we would put them out on lease to these ocean shipping companies. At some point during the history of the containerization world, the ocean shipping companies were losing a lot of money. And so what they did was they came to us, or we went to them, with what was called a sale leaseback. So we would buy their containers, their own built containers, right? So they would get that cash injection.
Yeah.
Now our fleet comprised of our boxes and then these ocean shipping company boxes. Well, I was in charge of having to sell those. And so the leasing company box, so leasing company means like Triton, Textainer, Beacon, Florence. Those are finance companies that built boxes and put them out on lease. An ocean shipping box is Maersk, MSC, the Japanese carriers that I spoke to about. So there's already two different ones. So when we bought those, we had our core fleet. Then we were also selling off, those boxes we got through a sale leaseback. Those sale leaseback boxes were never as good as ours, but
we started identifying patterns between ocean shipping companies and which ones, took care of their boxes and which ones didn't. And so sometimes a 12-year-old container might seem like it is super used, and it came back and had very little damage. Another one came back from a Korean carrier with only 8 years of lease, and it was trashed. The life thing, yes, that is important. I have to admit that, but try to find out what the prefix is. Yeah. And then on the flip side, when you want pictures, that you know what? Sometimes you're just going to have we have the container stored in called a depot, container yard. Well, when we want them to go take a picture, that's asking them for a lot of value added that we're not really paying for. And it becomes difficult. So they'll typically go out there, and depending on the market conditions, like right now, we're in a market where containers are in demand.
Right.
But when they aren't in demand, there's stacks and stacks and stacks. And you want them to take a picture of a certain container, and it's in a row that's like 20 containers long and 5 containers stacked high. They're just going to take you bullshit pictures and send them to you.
Right.
So you have to be careful of that. I would say right now we happen to be in a marketplace where, unfortunately for the buyers, for you guys, it's very difficult to get your hands on containers. The price has gone through the roof. And
Yes.
that's really because the demand for cargo coming out of Asia is still so strong post-pandemic. I mean, we're in the middle of it here, but after China went through it, that there's so much freight being sent over that the ocean carriers are not returning the containers to the owners like us. Well, that's causing such a massive shortage.
Yeah.
And so you're getting just the dregs, like the worst of the worst right now. So right now the price is higher, the supply is much, much lower.
Yeah.
But the pendulum will swing. And so stepping back for a second, taking a bigger, broad view, I would say that, check the prefix. Ask for the prefix. If you know that it's NYK, MOL, or K-line, those are good boxes. If it's HDMOU, right, that's Hyundai, stay away from that. Or if it's a blue Hanjin box, they went bankrupt a few years ago. It's a big, crazy family government squabble. But Hanjin boxes, those are low quality. MSC boxes, low quality. The other thing to consider is the color of the container, right? A lot of leasing companies on our side, we purposely paint the boxes like this rusty color, brown red. Why? Because it hides the rust.
Yeah.
If you buy white, that shows the rust.
Yeah.
Or blue shows the rust. So that's also to be considered. When it comes to one trippers, you guys hit on that. You do that point already. The one trippers, you can find a lot of 20-foot one trippers. The high cubes are a little bit more difficult. And then the other bizarre thing, just to teach you guys from the finance side, is that a 20-foot container brand new out of the factory, the average price maybe, over the history of containers is $2,000. So then we use a factor of 1.7 to determine the high cube price, right? So it's like $3,400. The weird part is that when it comes to selling the box, the price is much closer. Yeah. So sometimes we're actually selling 20-footers for a price higher than a high cube.
Yeah.
And it's because, for storage business, do you really need a high cube to store your stuff, or a 20-footer is good? And then using that point, there's a lot more 20-foot one trippers than there are high cubes. And then let's see, the last part is that the price of a box for the resale market is usually, pretty linear with the price of a brand new container for the ocean shipping companies. So my point there is that it's about 55-60%, right? So if you hear that the brand new boxes are selling for $2,200, well, then you can expect that, the crappy used box is going to be about 60% of that. When it comes to the one trippers, those are built to a different spec than a lease box. Mm-hmm. So the quality is a little less, but you're right. You don't really, it doesn't have to be built to such a high quality because it's not going to get all those back and forth uses of moving freight, right? It's going to come over with freight one way, as you mentioned, China typically, to somewhere in the U.S., and it made it once. But you got to be careful because there's a lot of times where those boxes were rejected at the factory They were built, at a poor quality, poor spec. You mentioned that there's stock photos. Yep. There are tons of traders out there that are building companies with no assets. They don't own the containers. They're building a pretty website. And I apologize if that's what anyone's business is right now. I don't want to insult you guys. Right? There are people that are building putting really nice, putting pictures of really nice boxes, making it appear that they have, containers for sale, and all they're doing is they're going to quick buy one and then sell it back to you.
Yeah.
So the other thing I would suggest is there's an association called the NPSA, and again, if I'm telling secrets that I'm harming people's business, then I apologize. But there's an association called the NPSA, the National Portable Storage Association, and pre-COVID, they had 2 seminars a year, a big conference. It was in Dallas, it was in Vegas, it was going to be in DC last year, where there's literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people in the container space. Everyone from the factories down to modification companies, truckers, mom and pop shops, modifications. It's amazing. It seems like such a boring business, but that's why I was so excited when I saw this chat group, because that's what I do. So there's a big one in the spring, there's a small one in the fall, but if you check out the MPSA, that will lead you to an unbelievable amount of contacts and suppliers. And then obviously the higher you go for the pecking order of, who's controlling the boxes. If you can get it directly from the ocean shipping company, great. It's going to be cheaper. If you can get it directly from a leasing company, great. It's going to probably be cheaper. Not always, because leasing companies make deals with large volume traders. And of course, if you're going to take, thousands of boxes off our hand, well, we're going to work a deal with you. At the same time, depending on which way the market goes, it can change overnight. So there are times where the price is stable for months. Then there's times where, Jesus, I might sell a box for a 20-footer, I'm sure maybe like $1,500 in LA one day, and then $1,600 the next day, $1,700 the next day. And then when no one was buying it for 17, I knew it was back down to 16. But it's that much of a commodity.
Yeah.
I know I said a lot really quickly. I was really excited to see that there was a room about this. But if anyone wants to ask me any questions directly or stab me because I told some secrets, feel free to hit me up.
We are not going to stab you, David.
We are not mad at you, David. We are not mad. This is all about us being information station about that container life. So we truly appreciate everything that you said.
Yes, thank you.
I'll always be free and willing to help. If someone wants to say, "Hey, listen, you told too much there," tell me to bring it back. I'll do that too.
No, it seemed like they need a David on their team, because if you guys are out here, acquiring containers and you don't really know what all needs to be had, this is why you create an ecosystem of people that can help you with it. So, no, you guys need a David.
I will tell you the ins and the outs.
Yes. Follow David. Inbox David. Follow Bill. Inbox Bill. Listen, we about this container life, and we are in this together because, as he mentioned, there's a whole line that goes along with this process, from what Bill talked about and what he does all the way to David. Go ahead, Mojo.
We got 2 hands up. We popping tonight.
Yes.
Wait a minute. Let me see.
So bring you guys right on up. Thank y'all. And tonight's topic was pros and cons, but within the pros and cons, we still had to educate y'all about the topic at hand. But we also gave you guys tips, that you can use to be able to be successful in this. And David gave y'all the juice. He just poured it all on y'all. So y'all can't say y'all didn't know. He done gave y'all names of companies to stay away from, what to look for, how to get straight to the source. Because let's talk about it from his perspective. We're a green construction firm, and so we also are very big on cost savings. And so he's trying to give you guys some things that's going to reduce the time and headache, of going through this process. He's trying to help y'all understand what it takes to have those and create those relationships if this is something that you're going to stay into, because the container life is not temporary. That means you're going to be about this life. So you got to be ready for that. Joshua, thank you for coming to the stage. You had a question?
Yeah, no, my big concern is, with all the building regulations that are everywhere, are you guys finding success in putting these things in? How are you dealing with county building codes and departments and all this kind of crazy stuff?
Well, for starters, Joshua, the key is your team. And so, what makes our company unique and what will make you successful in doing these container build outs is the team that you have. David will be a part of your team. Somebody like Bill that you may have missed talking earlier will be a part of your team. So, what I mean by that is your architect makes a difference, and your engineers make a difference, and your general contractor makes a difference. Who is the most important? Your architect. You want to know why? Your architect is going to be who tells the story of your project. And so a part of building those relationships is, I tell people, and I talked about it a little bit last week, but I'm going to go a little deeper, is that you guys really, if you're going to get into this, have a pre-planning meeting. It's not going to kill you guys to have a conversation with all the departments who have to approve you for your project in advance to kind of understand their perspective and address their concerns with the use of containers within your construction project. So to answer your question, Joshua, your team really makes a difference because they're going to be the one that's going to paint the picture for planning and zoning and coding to accept your project. And, the owners of this group and us and Mojo, we have 100% approval rates because our team is able to take the picture, the vision of that project, and eloquently and succinctly explain that to these departments. So they'll ask questions about, the external. We don't want it looking like container. Oh, no problem. We can add some to the outside, solve that problem. We want it to look like the houses in the neighborhood. Not a problem. What do you want it to look like? A colonial? What is it that you want? And so we try to, during that pre-planning hearing, actually address all those concerns and make sure, if you're going to have a pre-planning hearing, make sure you're taking notes of who said what, because if you come back to get your permits later, they can't hit you with, oh, no, we need this to happen or that to happen. You're going to say, well, actually Mojo said on this date that this is specifically what you want. And I even asked to record, the meeting. So for your notes sake, air quotes, you can't see me if you're on Clubhouse. So ask, can you record the meeting? Because a lot of these meetings nowadays are being recorded. Go ahead, Josh.
So would you say that? I mean, when I look at it from a real estate standpoint and a developer and a builder standpoint, and full disclosure, I'm a real estate broker. I would think that the engineer's stamp would probably carry a little bit more weight than the architect. Do you see that being the case?
It all goes hand in hand. You have to remember the architect cannot do this without the engineer. So everybody's stamp of approval is on this project, literally architect stamps and engineer stamps. And so from that perspective, when they see that these two team people who are technically in different trades, so to speak, but are all working on this project, when they see that, they actually are more comfortable in knowing that the project will be executed properly. So it doesn't matter if you're doing your project in an area that doesn't have a lot of regulations, or you are in one that has a lot of regulations. The stronger you look as far as your team, the better off your project will be and the more successful you can be. It looks like Josh got pushed down. So with that, any other questions from the actual audience? I see that we had two people at one point in time. Mojo, were you able to get the other person? Looks like they left. Bill came back.
They left, but Bill came back up. I guess he has something else to say.
Bill, hey.
Hey, yeah, I thought I'd pop back up on the last part of the conversation there with Joshua, and yeah, it really is about team because to say is one more important than the other, it really is about the team because you can't really say one or the other because when you're doing any built project and you have one is you have your construction docs, you've got to decide which you're going to build. then you have your permit set, your permit application. And, and it depends where you are. You're staying in the U.S., it depends where you are in the U.S. In some places, you need an architect. Some places, an engineer can submit the permit drawings without an architect. Some places, don't need either if it's residential.
Yeah.
It just depends on where you're building it. And but at the end of the day, I think I just wanted to chime in on that key point that it's sort of like a hand-in-hand kind of thing. If you do one and don't do the other, and that's why, in the pool of consultants, usually there'd be architect, structural engineer, MEP engineer, builder, and in an integrated build, you would, have it as design build. And so say, Mojo and Jessica, like how you're working is if you're doing a turnkey type thing, then the client comes to you guys and you have your team that you work with, and then it provides for the client that sort of that one stop shopping kind of thing. And but behind the scenes, that it really involves a lot of people to chime in, because you're also maybe going to need soil science, civil engineering, because wherever you're going to build, in most places, they're going to need some site information. And even if you are prefab or modular and you come in and you're just dropping big boxes on site, you still are going to have site plans and all that stuff. And also because of that, you need materials to start with. So you're probably going to need a survey of the land. So if it's not a region where they have plats on file, like a plat would have the very basic information that you would need to put on your permit set drawings, then you will need a surveyor. And back in the day, every property that was sold had a survey. And these days, in the past 10 years, it's rare that I see so many that have no survey. And I've had clients that we're starting the project, we get the survey and find out that the property boundaries are quite different than they thought. They bought the property, it was all, put documents in the sale, and it turns out like on this side it's maybe 3 feet different, and that side is 6 feet different. And so it really is, like I said, that teamwork to get it through. And on the development side, if you're working with a team, then you have to realize that design sells, a strong team sells. And I was consulting a developer out west the other day, and he was saying that he did a project without, with trying to keep those soft costs down, and so cutting out some of the consultants that he would have to have on this project. And he got around it, he got to do it. And then the next project, he used his consultant team, and the project actually sold faster, and it was a better project, sold in a few days. And he says, wow, so whatever the soft cost was, what those consultants cost me, I made my money back double. And so that's what I always remind people that are looking at it in an investment sense. Like say you want to go in and do some container home, affordable housing, or mid-level or high-end housing, or mixed use, that, find your team. And that's what Mojo and Jessica are talking about here, is that, they've got some experience in this, and they're the leaders on the team, and they've got the people behind them to support them.
For sure. Thank you for that. We appreciate you. Joshua, we don't know what happened. If you want to come back and finish chatting, feel free to come back up. As we kind of make our closing remarks, keep in mind that some of the pros can outweigh the con, but I think sometimes when you find more fault in something, it's usually because there's a lack of clarity or understanding. And so that's the whole purpose of our platform, to kind of educate you guys about these processes. And so remember that we're here every Monday and Thursday at 9:30 p.m. So we're auditorily, we are on Clubhouse. We're also on video for YouTube and Facebook. Please follow Mojo on Mojo Knows, the Black Box Queens on Facebook and on Instagram and on YouTube. And then Living Living for YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. Another thing I wanted to make mention of, which we don't normally do, you can consult us on our project, on your project. So feel free to reach out to us, follow us, inboxes, ask us for some insight. We definitely want you to be successful. Joshua, come back up. What's up?
No, I just stepped down just because I was giving you guys the opportunity to answer. It wasn't that I was trying to. I appreciate all the follow up that you guys gave on that. It's frustrating when you look at alternative building. I mean, we're talking going back to straw bale and all kinds of different things. There's always pushback from the conventional stick built home, and so it can get very frustrating. And it's just nice to hear that you guys are actually having success doing something that's not traditional. And this one size fits all doesn't fit anyone ultimately. So it's just really refreshing to hear what you guys are talking about.
For sure. Thank you for saying that, Josh. And I concur with what you're saying. I think the biggest challenge that we've had as a growing company, and I'm sure Mojo's experience and Three Squared, who are the architects that they're owners of this group. Some of our greatest challenges come from us having to educate these municipalities about this process. It's weirdly enough, and I had this conversation earlier today with somebody that it's so commonly used across seas. So you can go to most countries, they're building stadiums and doing all this, these huge projects out of containers, and we can barely get a residential structure done without being harassed and kind of go through the rigmarole. And so what I would say is, Joshua, if you're looking to get into this industry, to be honest with you, they have all kinds of reports. So if you want to DM me, you got a tiny home feasibility study, we got the container feasibility report, just so people can understand, like, it's approved everywhere. It's just, unfortunately, it just takes you a little extra to have to educate, certain municipalities about things to help them understand why it can be used and it's beneficial, and that, of course, financially you're credible and that your project be adding value to the area that you're doing your project in. So don't give up.
So are you guys finding that you can do this as the primary dwelling on a parcel? Because sometimes with even like the tiny homes and stuff, it has to be the secondary. You have to have some kind of building department approved primary dwelling, and then you can do the secondary things. Are you guys having success with it being the primary dwelling on the parcel?
Yes. So most of our projects are primary dwellings, where they're not accessory dwelling units. So they're not add-ons, they're not mother-in-law in suites, they're not any of that. So we only know the opposite of what you just mentioned. I've never had, even as now accessory dwelling units, weirdly enough, that's where we've had a lot of challenges. So somebody that owns a property that they already have an existing structure on, and they want to add like an Airbnb or something onto it, maybe for their family member or something. We've actually had more issues with that than we've had for primary structures. So that's interesting.
I find that to be bad. I'm in California.
Mm-hmm. Oh yes, definitely in California.
California's kind of crazy when it comes to that. It's almost the opposite right now, because California has some very strong ADU legislation, and the California Association of Realtors actually suing municipalities that are not allowing ADUs.
Yeah.
So I think you guys should find California to be a very ADU friendly area, but on the flip side, we're super stringent about the primary dwelling. So it's almost an exact opposite of what you guys are talking about right now.
I agree, and I actually started out on the West Coast, and so that's why you see my excitement in my face. I'm excited. You can't see my face because you're on Clubhouse, but my excitement comes because I saw the success of these projects on the West Coast, and so now I'm located in the Southeast, and we have offices in the Northeast and in the Midwest. And so, long story short, what you're saying is actually you're kind of expressing to those who are listening, like, this can be successful if done correctly and if accepted, And so what I find is from each municipality to each municipality, it is something different. each area has their own standards and acceptances and ordinances, and then don't get the HOA part in there where homeowners associations have their little. I mean, these little things. To be honest with you, it's just about people wanting to grow in this industry. Excuse me, and what we're finding is a lot of people just aren't really growing in the industry because they just know what they know and they're okay with traditionally built homes, and they can't fathom using anything else because you have to remember from the beginning of time that's all that's been used, stick built traditional construction. And so when you start talking about innovation and bringing new ideas in, a lot of people are not okay with that change. And so that's what this is all about. You asking these type of questions, giving that kind of feedback, like, California is a little different and this is what we experience here, just giving people a different perspective because there could be, Clubhouse is international. So what we find may be easy, again, in the Southeast area or even in the Northeast, may be a little bit more complicated on the West Coast or even in a different country altogether. And so your insight is valuable, Joshua, and thank you. Any other questions or comments you wanted to make?
I think I'm pretty good. I think the biggest thing, well, maybe one more. I think maybe the biggest thing is, at least out here on our side, we're in a housing crisis. We're somewhere between 1.5 and 3 million units shy of where we need to be to handle the housing crisis that we're facing.
Yeah.
And so what you end up with is, you end up with a situation where your inventory is so low that there's so many people competing for what they're for a place to live, and it's driving prices up. And you have so many environmental constraints on what you can do. And so there's, you need, if say you need 1.5 million houses in the next 10 years, you have to, or even in the next 5 years, we're not getting enough starts because we're having too many steps along the way, too many things that are cutting us off from being able to meet that demand. So, I mean, in the way to go about it is to look at alternative methods, to look at things like this, like you guys are talking about, where people can do something that, affordability is a massive issue, and materials are just getting more and more expensive. You guys are talking about containers that are only costing $2,300 or $2,500 when you're looking at lumber packages that are costing 10 times that much. Just even drop them on the project before you put them up. And it's, there's a lot of validity to what you guys are talking about, and I love hearing this conversation, and I wish that the municipalities would open their minds and look at alternative methods. I mean, containers, straw bale, rammed earth, all kinds of different stuff that you can do that is absolutely habitable, that people have been doing for centuries before we built this system that we feel like we're all trapped in. There's so much more that we can do. And with that, I'll move myself back to the audience. For this conversation.
Before you go, Joshua, it's great to hear you talking about alternative building methods and things like straw bale. There's hempcrete. There's all kinds of different materials and stuff, and especially like at a time like now when lumber costs are skyrocketing. And somebody was asking me the other day about that when you are working on a project and all of a sudden, the project was already priced out and then lumber prices skyrocket. We were saying, well, you have to have a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C to be able to shift gears. Are you going to switch to light gauge metal framing? Or are you going to switch, to some other form of structure or enclosing your envelope? And the big thing that I tell everybody, in this whole story about container homes and with building departments and municipalities, if they sort of push back on container homes or, it's one thing if it's aesthetic and say if there's a design board or a community association or something like that, and they say it doesn't meet the aesthetic requirements. But other than that, as far as it being able to be used as a construction material, really, there shouldn't be any problem anywhere, because the idea is it's how you approach it. Because when I think I mentioned earlier, maybe before you were in the room, the idea that when you submit for that, you have your planning review and your building permit submittal, it's a set of drawings that basically has site plan, building, everything, all the infrastructure, and you're not presenting it as this is a container home. You're presenting it as this is a home. And then in the drawings, like if I had a set of drawings in it with a house that was built out of containers, it's not going to have something specific to the container. It's just going to show the plans and elevations and sections and details of the home. And then in the structural sheets, it will have details and load counts and stuff for the, just like how any other building would. And that's how I've seen that it has to be skinned, because, once you go and you say, can I build container homes? Then that's when they say, well, that's a product. It's not a building, so that was.
I entirely agree with what you're saying right there. It's like one of these things. If you show your cards, they're going to just knock you down. But what you're saying by showing calcs, for us out here, that's wind calcs, snow load calcs, seismic calcs, and if you can have it, that's what I was talking about earlier when I was saying about the engineer stamp. Like if you can have somebody come in and put that stamp on and say this structure meets your requirements. And again, if you're not in an HOA, if you're in a unincorporated county area that's running on basic county codes, who cares about the aesthetics? Get the structure built. Because right now, out here in our area, as a developer, I do some building. We're spending $220,000 to $250,000 to build a 1,700 to 1,900 square, maybe a 1,500 to 1,800 square foot, 1,500 to 1,800 square foot house, and we're having to put it on the market at $350 to make some money on that. That's not affordable. It's not affordable. I don't care if you're in California or if you're in Georgia or if you're in Michigan or you're in Texas, where you are. There's no entry level housing left anywhere. Everything is this unattainable, unreachable thing, and that's what's so appealing about these alternative methods. And it's not to say there's a difference between cheap and inexpensive.
Yeah.
We're not talking about cheap. We're not talking about building crap. We're talking about building something with alternative materials, things that already exist, things that are, that have a higher return, and you can put people in housing, which, I don't know how it is where you guys are, but right now in California, we're having a severe homeless crisis. Every city, town, village, everywhere. I don't care if you're in the mountains, the valley, the coast, there are homeless everywhere. And it's not only a socioeconomic crisis, it's a health crisis, it's an environmental crisis. And so we need to put people in homes, and we need to stop looking at housing as only for the privileged, only for those that can afford it. We need to, without getting political about it, but really honestly, we need to put roofs over people's heads.
Yeah.
It needs to be, it's a basic human right? Like
Right.
hierarchy of needs, shelter is one of those.
Yeah. And that's
Southern or northern, Josh?
Yeah, and I like how you just mentioned that, because that's our company's focus. We focus on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We start at the most basic of basics, and we go all the way up. And so I think what you mentioned is very important, because this housing crisis is not a geographical thing. It's a global thing. Worldwide, I can tell you what the statistic is. They need probably close to 5 trillion homes to put a dent in the housing crisis. And how do I know? Because I look at data when we do our projects. I don't do projects in neighborhoods that don't really have a need, if that makes sense. And so I would say that you're spot on with what you're saying, Joshua, as far as if more people, and this is why we do what we do, we're hoping to, get into TV shows and have all kinds of other mediums where we can just educate. Like, listen, this needs to be the norm. Because this one, and in my heart, and Mojo feels the same, this one product alone could solve the housing crisis. But the question is, do anybody really want to solve the housing crisis? I'm not going to get political and get on my soapbox about it, but certain things can be easily solved by this one product alone. But the question is that something that people want? It's just like you got your doctors and medicine. Keep you on medicine, you never get healthy. You got to keep coming to see the doctor, right? Same thing. Why go to using more sustainable things that outlast traditional construction? It's going to solve this crisis, and how do they make money off of that?
One of the things we talk about in the real estate industry, people they'll buy a piece of land and they'll say, "Hey, can I come up here with my fifth wheel? Can I come up here with my camper? Can I come do this? Can I come do that?" And a lot of municipalities, not only in California but throughout the country, they don't want you to do that kind of stuff because if you buy a parcel of land for $20,000, and everybody's got a different tax rate, but out here it's 1.2%, so you're paying $2,400, $240 a year in property taxes versus building a state-built home as your primary dwelling. Now this thing's got an estimated value of $300,000 or $400,000. Now they're getting $5,000 out of you. So there's a lot of it that has to do with economics as well, and the way that these county departments are looking at this kind of thing, and they'll blame it on development safety. They'll blame it on we're just trying to protect you and make sure that you live in a suitable dwelling. But the truth of the matter is, if we were all doing these alternative building things that weren't costing us a lot of money, that might not be assessed at a particular value, the truth is the county coffers get a little bit lower, and that's where I think that's where the conversation doesn't. They don't want to really have that conversation with us. And I don't know what your guys' opinions are on that, but I see that here at my local there.
Josh, I'm curious, are you in northern or southern?
I'm at I think we kind of we're at the northern tip of Southern California, but really at the southern tip of the Central Valley. But I'm born and raised in San Diego, but I'm just at the southern tip of the Sierras, a little tiny mountain town. So we're kind of in the southern central part of California.
I was just curious, so many Southern California, more specifically, so many planning departments. I've had so many conversations with small towns that they're actually quite interested in alternative housing right now. I've had some great conversations in the past 2 months with different people in planning departments that just different incentives that they're trying to get active and partnerships that they're trying to make with it's all in the affordable housing arena, and I guess depending on what region you're in, but yeah.
I think Bill and Josh, if you guys are in the area, it would behoove you guys to maybe reach out. Bill's the builder, and Josh is the broker. So when you guys are doing your construction projects, Josh can help you get rid of them. He sounds like he has an interest in it. And so what I would like to do too is invite everybody that's on here now back again on Monday when we have our next call, and maybe we'll use that as the topic so we can further this conversation. Because I think it's important to understand that what we do, one, you got to have the people that's passionate about it, which is all of us, right? But the other side to it, we have to focus on solution-oriented actions. And so what you guys are saying are things that really need to be taken into consideration in order for us to kind of take what we're doing to the masses. And so with that, we thank you guys so much for joining as speakers and listeners. If you're on Facebook and YouTube, thank you guys for watching. We appreciate you guys. And please follow us on all our mediums that we talked about: Shifting Living, Mojo Knows, Black Queen Box, Just CEO One, and we will happily be here again on Monday. Same day, same time at 9:30, guys. Y'all have a fantastic day, and we look forward to seeing you guys again soon. Take care.
Take care, guys. Thanks again.
Bye, guys.
Good night.